Today, we're going to dispel a lot of common myths around farming, particularly meat and dairy, and we are going to talk conventional agriculture, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. I am super excited to have today's guests with me, Tara and Natalie, who are also the hosts of the Discover Ag podcast. Now, these ladies are doing a lot. They are both ranchers, farmers, and have been in this space for generations. Their families have been doing this for generations. And so I really wanted to sit down with them today and talk about a lot of common myths that spread around about farming in general, because a lot of these things get a really bad name. And there are a lot of really bad documentaries on Netflix and a lot of these other channels that paint things in a negative light with a lot of untruth. So make sure that you follow Tara and Natalie's podcast and all of their social channels. I'm going to put them down in the show notes for you, especially if you enjoy this conversation. And don't forget to hit that like button, share this episode out with a friend or family member who might be confused about some of these topics. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I do want to thank two sponsors. The first one is going to be Viva Rays. Now, they are my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms with their circadian glasses. You can use my code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays. As always, link down in the show notes. And then upgraded formulas, a fantastic way to make sure that your minerals are actually in balance. Most of us have some sort of a mineral deficiency or imbalance, and their hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation is a really great way to understand what that looks like for you. It's different for everyone. So again, use my code YOGI12 or YOGI to save over at Upgraded Formulas. Links down in the show notes, and let's jump into today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm super excited to have two ladies here. They are both farmers, and we are going to talk all about what they do and just some kind of dispel some common myths around agriculture. And I'm excited. So if you want to just introduce yourselves, Natalie, if you want to start, and then we'll get to Tara and we'll just go from there.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Natalie Kovarik. I ranch in central Nebraska with my husband and our kiddos. I am a Nebraska transplant. I originally grew up in Southwest Montana, also on a cattle ranch though. So I have grown up in agriculture my entire life. I did kind of quote unquote leave it for a little bit. I actually got my degree in pharmacy. And so after I graduated college, I didn't really have plans to return to our family ranch. I was actually practicing as a full-time pharmacist at one of our, quote unquote, bigger cities in Montana, which is probably a relative term, depending where some listeners are tuning in from. But I was pretty content. I was close to my family ranch, but I loved being a pharmacist. I loved practicing. I was in a hospital kind of clinic setting. And I really thought that would be, what I did. And then I met my husband and he whisked me away to Nebraska. And I found myself kind of back on a ranch, back in agriculture. And I started sharing about it online, which led me to Tara and our current business, Discover Ag, and our current podcast, Discover Ag. So I'll kind of let Tara jump in and since she's the other half of the business.
Yeah. So as Natalie mentioned, my name is Tara Vander Dussen. I dairy farm with my husband and our two daughters in eastern New Mexico. Similar to Natalie, though, I also grew up on a dairy farm in New Mexico, my family's farm, and ended up going away to college and getting my degree in environmental science, and ended up obviously coming back to my husband's family farm, and have spent, the last 10 years working as an environmental consultant in the dairy consulting space, environmental space. And then similar to Natalie, started sharing online just a lot of misinformation. People just didn't understand, dairy farming and some of the complexities there. And so just kind of opening up our farm and our life to people on social media. And then it led into, Discover Ag, and kind of, as the name says, like allowing people to discover ag in new ways and uncover different pieces of agriculture that people may not have seen or been exposed to before.
I love it. What would you say is really the most common misconception, either of you, that people really have about the industry that you're in?
Yeah, there's so many. I feel like it depends on what people are passionate about, and that's something that Natalie and I feel like recently have really come to realize is depending on kind of where where your passions are, what your questions are, is where you seem to, have the most questions about or misconceptions about. I feel like from the dairy space, and even in the cattle ranching space, there is, the misconception that like big is bad. That's something we see a lot. There's a lot of misconceptions of exactly like how we do what we do. I love for Natalie to kind of get into some of the misconceptions about like the grass-fed versus grain-finished beef. And so I don't know, there's a lot of different directions we could go.
Yeah, I guess the grass-fed versus grain-fed is interesting, and I think there's a lot of talk around that, especially in kind of the alternative, health communities. So maybe we could jump into that first.
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of kick this off, I guess. When you're looking at things, the food system, I guess we always try and remember that there are different lenses to look through it. So there is the environmental lens, which we should all be very conscientious of. There's also an economic lens, which I think gets left out a little bit in the conversation. And then there's the social part of it as well. And right now, there is a lot of focus on the environmental. When you go back to what you just kind of asked us a second ago, it was, what are big misconceptions? And I do feel like a lot of them right now are basically really revolving around the environmental issues. As a society right now, we're very focused on that. And that is very good. We should be. We have to take care of this planet. We have to, be able to give back to what it's giving to us. And so I think that's good, but we always need to remember to like loop in the other parts of it. And I think that's important when you look at like the grain fed versus grass fed as well. We really like to try and make things very simple and clean, like just choose grass fed and then you're doing your part to save the planet. But if you peel back the onion that is, there's a lot of layers and different parts to it. So for example, my family ranch, we are in a very beautiful part of the state of Nebraska, which a lot of people probably doesn't know exists, a beautiful part of Nebraska, but it does. It's called the Nebraska Sandhills, and it's actually the world's most intact, largest ecosystem still to this day. It is a beautiful set of basically rolling hills that are rangeland. That is what they're good at. That is what it's best served for, is ruminants out grazing grass, and it really couldn't be anything else. And so that's a really big part of the conversation, is that these, ruminants are doing really good things for the planet when you have them out grazing. As far as our ranch, we are conventional. So our beef does just enter, the conventional supply chain, and eventually will be grocery store beef or, restaurant beef, whatever it gets turned into. And so we get that, label conventional, but our operation is really regenerative. And so we do a ton of different practices that are really, really great for our operation and where we're located. And so we are grain finished. That's what our cattle get turned into at the end. But at the beginning, I think there's that misconception that, like kind of Tara said, it's big or bad. But if you followed along my social media, I think you would be really surprised at what, grain finished cattle actually look like at the beginning.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So what's the biggest difference?
Yeah. So one thing that I think has really gotten lost, the further we've gotten away from our food system when it comes to animal proteins and beef specific, because beef is actually very, very different than like chicken or pork. But beef is really segmented. And so there's actually, for example, Tyson would maybe own chicken from the beginning to the end. It's vertically integrated. The beef industry is not that way. There is no one unity that can own it from start to finish. It's actually about 3 to 4 sectors, 3 to 4, quote unquote families that actually sell in the middle. So it starts out at a ranch like ours, and then it gets sold to someone else, and then so on, so on. So grass finished and grain finished are going to look the beginning at the same. It would start kind of like the same as my family does, where at the beginning of it, it's called a cow-calf operation for like technical ranching terms. And what we do is we're raising that baby out at pasture with the mama on grass, and that's what the animal is eating, grass and milk. And that is the exact same for a grain finished animal and the exact same for a grass finished animal. The difference would be is when we, our family sells it off to like a feedlot. That would be the difference. And it's actually about like the last, 4 to 6 months of the animal's life, where grass finished, it would stay consuming only grass as its diet. Whereas grain finished, it gets grain introduced in addition to like the other things that it's in its diet, the other forage. And so really, there are studies that came out of Oklahoma State that actually show, like, if you do the complete life cycle assessment of like a cow's diet from beginning to end, corn actually only makes up 7% of a corn finished animal's diet. So it's very, very minute. And I think society kind of has this image that a corn, grain finished corn-fed cattle are just like mowing down on corn on the cob, like that's all they eat, but it's actually only right at the very end in the feedlot stage. And again, it's a very, very small percentage in the grand scheme of what they're eating for their full diet.
Got it. And what would you say that some of the other biggest misconceptions are that people have surrounding just what you do in general versus regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, you mean on the beef? Do you want me to stick with beef?
Yeah, we can talk beef and then go to dairy, because I know there's I see a lot of stuff online targeting the dairy industry, especially from people who are plant-based. They have a lot of negative things to say about both, but yeah.
Yeah, I think what I guess the message I would like to put out for anyone listening is that, right now media or, social media or, whoever it is, maybe it's chefs, maybe it's food influencers, I don't know, maybe it's a celebrity. But they're really sticking conventional into one clean box, one side of the story, and then regenerative into like the opposite in the spectrums. It's very split down the middle, and it's very clean, and it is a regenerative label and an organic label, and that is it. And I think that is actually a very poor representation of, honestly, the whole U.S. food system as a whole. It is much more gray. It is not black and white like that. It is much more of what Tara and I like to say is a spectrum. So again, I guess just answering for our operation, we would, get that conventional quote, label, right? Because our beef we're raising to eventually enter the conventional food supply chain. But we, for years have been rotational grazing. We do cover crops. We do no-till. We have a butterfly habitat. I mean, we have so many things that would be quote unquote regenerative that I think would really surprise people to see us again under that like conventional label. And so it kind of puts, Tara and I in one of our little mini soapboxes, which labels are really sometimes more of a marketing scheme, honestly, than they are to really give, unfortunately, consumers transparency around the food from whether it's a health aspect or even a practice aspect. I think it's really deceiving in both of them. And so, I'm very, very proud of our operation and how we manage our land and our animals. And I think if you were to, see what we do and again, see the list of practices in our operation, you would for sure want to stick us under the regenerative side. But, per society's labels, we go under the conventional side.
How can people tell the difference in what they're buying? I mean, is it like the labels seem to be so super confusing? Is there anything people can look for in particular?
I think if you care a lot about sourcing your meat, the best thing is to do is try and find direct to consumer, because labels in the grocery store really are confusing. I promote grocery store beef. That's where my cattle go, and so I don't want people to feel bad about buying grocery store beef. I don't think there's anything wrong with grocery store beef. But if you really want to know, it was US produced, you want to know that it was actually harvested here. You want to be able to know, what it was being fed and talk to the producer and feel good, I guess. I would not rely on grocery store labels. I would find a direct to consumer, someone in your area you can order from. There's a ton online anymore. You can even just ship it, so you don't have to find someone locally if you don't want. Ordering direct from the rancher is like a really good thing to do if you care about sourcing your beef in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, because I feel like I've talked with other ranchers before, and one of the complaints that some of them have had is that, when you go to the grocery store, the labels can be so tricky. You have no idea if your meat is actually coming from, like, let's say Brazil, or there's no way of telling, right?
Yeah. And I could touch on that a little bit. So your whole cuts, like your steaks and roasts and things like that. The US does import beef, but we're not really importing for whole cuts like that. We're importing for lean trimmings to meld into our ground beef so that we can make our beef like the leaner percentage that consumers want, right? Whether that's like 70-30 or 80-20, I don't know. We just harvest and process our own cattle. So it's been a long time since I've gone to the grocery store to buy beef, but that is what importation, mostly for the US is. We're not bringing in cattle for those whole cuts. But it is true. There is some major labeling issues, even if it says product of the USA. it doesn't necessarily mean it could have those trimmings in there. It basically just means that it was like processed here, it was harvested here. And so that's probably what the ranchers are talking about, because it is very deceiving, which is why I say, like, if you're going to be looking at, basically, if you're going to be going to the grocery store beef, I feel like you can source anything from the grocery store beef and it's going to be the same, whether it has like a natural beef on it or, some label like that. Like, that's not even regulated. I don't even know what natural beef means, So if you're looking for labels like that, I would just buy anything at the grocery store that fits your budget. If you really want to know that it, like I said, it's US beef, it was by a producer here, it was harvested here, it's one whole cow, like all of that stuff, the best option is just to find direct to consumer.
Got it. And as far as the dairy industry goes, I guess we could talk about that kind of on the same thread as well, right?
Yeah, so dairy is so different from beef in a lot of ways. Natalie mentioned how beef is different than like hogs or poultry, and dairy is different from beef and hogs and poultry and all of them. It's crazy how sometimes we lump animal proteins all in together when really they are like such different categories. So from the dairy farming side, we raise our cows up from the time they are calves all the way till they enter a milking herd. And when they finally leave our farm to go for processing and go into the beef supply system. So they like never change ownership until they ultimately end up at the processor. And then from the milk side of things, it's also really crazy. I have a really cool stat that if you buy the conventional plain old like grocery store brand milk on the shelf, it comes from a farm less than 100 miles on average from that grocery store. And it takes only about 48 hours to get from our farm to the grocery store. So it is just a very localized product. It's one of the most local products you can actually get at your grocery store. And obviously that just has to do with the fact that you have to keep it refrigerated. It is a liquid, so it's pretty hard to transport, all of those factors. For our family personally, like we buy the store-bought milk on the shelf at the grocery store, just because, we know exactly what standards that's held to. Like all milk on the shelf, no matter what it is, is held to certain quality assurance standards. And so it's actually, milk is one of the most regulated products on the shelf, just because of the way, the fluidness of it, that you're able to, take samples and test it and do all of these things. And so there's a lot of safety protocols that actually go into milk.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess as far as like people on social media kind of doing broad generalizations around the dairy industry, we kind of talked a little bit about meat industry. What kind of things do you see, or what kind of things do people say that just tick you off? You're like, that's so inaccurate.
Yeah, I feel like one of them is definitely the antibiotic conversation, and then followed by the hormones. So I'll start with the antibiotics. The way that is portrayed as if there's like antibiotics in your milk. So that's why you have to buy organic. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Every single tanker of milk that leaves a farm is tested for antibiotics to the parts per trillion, which is like the highest level of science right now to be able to test for. And if a tanker came back positive, the farm actually has to pay to dump that milk, and it would never enter the food supply system. It's tested again at the plant, and then it's tested again, like randomized samples in bottles. So it's tested like all along the way for a number of different things, not just antibiotics, like quality assurance, temperature. If our milk at the farm is even a 1 degree over 36 degrees, the tank, like the trucker will not pick it up. That's just the way it is. They have to be under a certain temperature. And so there's so many things like that go into assuring that, the milk on the shelf is actually highest quality and is safe. And then ultimately, like it's super rare for a farm to test positive for antibiotics in their milk, like extremely rare. If it were to happen to you more than once, chances are your co-op or whoever was picking up your milk would no longer pick it up from you. Like you would just be kind of like put on a list that basically was like, nope, this farm is, because it cost everyone time and money and energy if something like that were to happen. And so it is like, when I see that online, I'm like, that is not true. There is no antibiotics in your milk. On the cow side, we are a conventional dairy farm. So we do treat our cows with antibiotics, but it is when they are sick, it is prescribed by a vet. And then when we give our cows antibiotics, they actually go into what we call a hospital pen. That's the technical term. And it's no different than the other pens, but it's really close to the barn. We can keep a better eye on them, and we separate out their milk. So as we milk them, their milk never enters the food supply system. And then even after they stop receiving antibiotics, we actually have a withdrawal or withhold period where we continue to milk them separate until it is completely out of the antibiotics are out of their system before they re-enter our herd. So again, again, like a lot of checks and balances going into play there on that side of things. From the hormone side, I think that what everyone sees is that, RBST free or from cows not treated with RBST on their milk jug. There is currently not milk on the shelf from cows treated with RBST. So that label, it had really good intentions in the beginning of obviously differentiating it. But at this point, it is like a redundant label. Like there is nothing on the shelf that has RBST. And so I think that's something that, it is like decades of misinformation and not understanding and labeling, and here we are now in 2023 where it's actually like a non-issue, and yet it's still something that consumers look for and want to see on their milk jugs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see so many things like the one thing I see is like, oh, farming, it takes tons of water. The farmers are like wasting all this water. So is that a true thing, or is that just like another farming myth that people just kind of make up?
That one is such a good one. I'll take it from the dairy side and then I'll go into beef and let Natalie jump in. From the dairy side, we're in New Mexico. So water is actually our like limited resource. It is very scarce here. And so we have gotten very efficient at our water use. And it's not just us, it's honestly dairies across the country. So a gallon of water on a dairy typically gets recycled 5 times, which is really crazy to see when you see it go through the system. I mean, the water is used to cool the milk. It's used to clean the barn. It's used to like flush out the alleyways. And then we ultimately store all the water we use in our barn along with all of our rainwater from our dairy in what's called a lagoon. And sometimes people see lagoons online as like bad raps, but I think it's actually a really incredible thing. Like we're able to store so much water in our, monsoon seasons, our really rainy seasons. And then all of that water is applied out on the crops. And it's nutrient rich water. So we actually take samples of that lagoon to see exactly what's in it before we apply it onto the crops. So we make sure that we're giving the crops not only water, but the right nutrients they need, which can actually limit our fertilizer use, which is, another positive thing to that recycled water. And then on the beef side of things, we always see those like crazy, I feel like I always think of those billboards that it's like, stop showering for 6 months or like, don't eat a cheeseburger. And what they forget to tell you is that like, it's over 90% of the water used to produce beef is actually what's called green water, not blue water. So green water is precipitation. So water that would fall from the sky out onto the rangeland, like what Natalie was talking about there in Nebraska. That water is going to fall from the sky and be absorbed by those plants, no matter whether the cattle are there or not. Only about 6% is actually blue water, which I think is what most people actually think of when they think of water. That is the water you are using to shower. That's the water you're using to drink out of. About 6% of beef's water is blue water. All the rest is rainwater. So those numbers get really, really skewed and are just not an accurate representation always of exactly what's going on the farm or ranch.
Good to know. And I guess the beef side, if you have anything to add to that, Natalie.
No, Tara covered it pretty well. We had at Summer Pasture, we have obviously cattle need access to water. And so we'll have stock tanks out there that, that's one way that we have to use water to provide beef. And then the other one is pivots, but other than that, like Tara said but it's just 6%. So a lot of it, the water is being used to like for the crops. And so that's another reason why sometimes that like grain finished cattle will, get a bad rap. But with grass finished cattle, you have to, be able to provide hay and stuff in the summer, especially if you're in an area that's what you're feeding them instead of from the ground, like if you have snow coverage. And so I think it really comes down to that they're twisting those stats and using rainfall water in those percentages to make it seem, more alarming and scary than it is.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, which is kind of the whole tactic behind the meat eating and the dairy is just like, how can we make this look as scary as humanly possible? So people will avoid this, which is usually to the detriment of people's health, I think.
Yeah, that's one thing Tara and I love to talk about is that like if we, there's a study out there that says if we as a society went, all vegetarian or we remove those animal proteins, it's like we would decrease our carbon footprint by about, it's right under 3%. It's like 2.7% or something right there. So which I think is a lot smaller than people think, like as much as we are fed, like, meatless Mondays, plant-based diets, that's what's going to save the planet. To think that yes, it would have an effect. We're not denying that, but it's less than 3%. And at the cost of, increased calories and decreased nutrition. And so it's like, even if that was the 2% reduction or 3% reduction, is it really worth, what would probably happen to our diets? I would say that like here in the US, we don't really have like a caloric problem. We have more of a nutrition problem. And so the idea of even taking out further things, those high dense, proteins, the animal meats, the milk, those things that are really, really good for us, we know are really, really good for us. It's kind of scary to think that we would do it just for that, 2.7%.
Right. And that it's bioavailable protein. I did a post on that last night and people are like, what's bioavailable protein? I'm like, your body can absorb it and use it, unlike protein from nuts and, all these other things. Like they're anti-nutrients. There are things that are going to block your absorption. And so animal foods are superior when it comes to being able to break them down and use them for energy. And I don't think that message and I think the plant-based people just completely miss the boat on that one, that we need these things as building blocks for the body completely, right?
Yeah, we actually on our podcast this summer did kind of a fun like debunking series where we brought on experts to debunk like negative, like Seaspiracy and Cowspiracy, and Game Changers, all of those films that are out there. And then we also highlighted positive ones you could watch too, that we felt like, maybe more accurately portrayed what's going on in agriculture and the food system. And we brought on a registered dietitian to debunk Game Changers. And, we spent a lot of time. So if your audience is interested, that's a good episode to listen to. But she really talked about those differences. And one of my favorite things that she said from the podcast is like, if you want to have a vegetarian vegan diet, like, yes, you can find all the proteins. You could make it through supplementation. She's like, but you have to be very nutrition literate. It takes a lot of work. You have to be, supplementing with so many things, and you really have to like know and understand. And the great thing about, just eating meat and eggs and dairy is like, it's very simple. It's very easy, right? You don't have to be like calculating and adding in extra stuff. And I just thought it was so, I just thought she said it really well when she was like, you just have to really understand what you're going on. And the majority of people, I'm a pharmacist, and some of the things she was talking about, I was like, oh yeah, like, like I'm like, if there's anyone that's in the supplement world, it's pharmacy. And so I was just like, yeah, you really have to know what you're going on. And I don't feel like the average consumer can do that properly.
Agree. I hope you're enjoying today's episode here on the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. Just a quick little reminder, if you are, make sure to hit the like button, share this video out with a friend, with a family member, leave us a comment, especially if you or someone you know really believes a lot of the propaganda around farming. I think it's really, really vital that we get this information out. And I wanted to also quickly remind you that all of my links, my free resources, as well as my courses are down in the show notes. And you can always use the code podcast to save 10% on those courses. Thank you again for listening to today's episode, and let's jump back into it. Yeah, I think a lot of people have a difficult time with it. Did you want to add anything to that, Tara?
Yeah, I feel like this is a space actually that dairy and beef are finally like kind of hitting hard and putting a lot of funding and research into. And I'm really glad. I'm excited to see what exactly comes out of it. I actually got to see some research a couple of weeks ago about like dairy proteins. And I think they're going to do similar things in the beef world, but it was really breaking down exactly which proteins. And one of the things she said to me that was crazy is that like a glass of milk has thousands of different types of proteins and compounds and like molecular structures that we need. And plant-based alternatives have about 2 types of protein. And so to think you're going to replicate like the nutritional availability, and that's not to say like I am all for like going and having nuts or having different vegetables, but like get them in their whole form instead of what we've broken down and pulled out of them to make like a replica of a different product. And so it was really amazing to see the science behind exactly like the protein structures of, what's going to be an animal protein versus, your plant-based alternatives.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I think milk, I just saw this bioavailable protein list and it was like eggs was number 1. And then I think milk was actually number 2. And then red meat was number 3. And I was like, oh, I didn't know milk was going to be so far up there on that list of bioavailable protein.
That is exactly the research. Some of the research I was talking about that the animal proteins have kind of banded together to like fund this research because it's pretty extensive what's going on. Some really great universities are a part of it. But yeah, it's that supposedly eggs, milk, milk and red meat. Like those are top three. And I mean, they're within a few percentages of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think for animal-based proteins, the next one was like soy, and it was about 45% compared to that like 98% for eggs, meat, and eggs, milk, and red meat. So you're talking about a massive, like this is not, the eggs, meat, and milk is a couple points. Plant protein really drops you down like almost half as much of bioavailability, which is just really crazy, because if you're reading the back of a carton even, and you think you're doing the right thing, like, okay, 8 for 8 grams, that's not even the case. It's probably closer to more like 4 bioavailability grams in plant-based versus, having the actual animal protein.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'd love to hear more about kind of debunking these vegan documentaries too, because when I used to have a page and a platform that was a little bit more talking about just meat and eating meat for health, I would get a lot of these people are like, you need to go watch Seaspiracy. And I'm like, no, I don't actually.
It has been a lot of fun to debunk them this summer. I had watched all of them before. Natalie actually came to our debunking series with never having watched any of them and like with fresh eyes. And it was interesting to, I feel like, see her perspective. And then when we brought on, these experts with us, those are some jam-packed episodes with a lot of information to break down, just because, they have some wild accusations in those movies. Just absolute false, straight up lies. And one of the things I think I left all of them thinking is, how are these still on Netflix or other streaming services as documentaries when really they're more like movies? The amount of fiction that's in them is alarming.
I agree.
We're debunking Seaspiracy in August, so it has not, I'm not sure when this will go live, but as of right now, it has not been released. But we interviewed she's a deep sea diver and just very immersed into the seafood industry. And she said she actually reached out to Kip Anderson, which is the producer of, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy. And when she found out he was doing Seaspiracy, said, hey, like, I would love to be a part of this. I think there are some things within this, the industry that definitely need light on that we could talk about. And I really want to be a part of this. And he did not take her help because he knew that, he basically wanted to portray it in a certain way, and having people of her caliber speaking about different things. And it was just very interesting to hear her perspective that she had basically one-on-one about, how going into this film, it was made with intentions and it was going to become out, with those intentions made, specifically selecting people to have that narrative, carried throughout it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never watched it before. I just have been people tell me like, you've got to go watch this if you think that it's okay to eat these things. What are some of the biggest things that you learned in that debunking session that we could share with people?
I feel like one of the big ones was, Natalie, what was it in Cowspiracy that it was like the whole planet will run out of something by 2030? And we were like, because it was an older movie, right? Like it's already 10 plus years old. And so some of them were kind of funny. I'm curious with Seaspiracy, the same, it's fairly new. And they have some pretty, they have one stat that's like the ocean will run out of fish by 2040. And so like not that far off. And when we were talking with the expert, she was like, the seafood industry, like as a whole, in a lot of places is at like 98% sustainable. So we're actually doing like a pretty good job. And as Natalie said, she acknowledged like ways we could do better, like things we could do different. So it wasn't without like taking some fault and saying like, this is how we could do better. But she was like, there's no truth to that whatsoever, that our ocean's going to run out of fish. And it was similar with the Cowspiracy, that it was like that. Oh, it was the Amazon. That's what they said. The Amazon rainforest would be completely gone by 2025. I think was the stat. And obviously we're only 2 years away from that. Could we be doing things better? Again, yes, but just wild accusations.
Yeah. That's one of the things. I think these like little tiny rumors turn into these big, huge things. And then you get people kind of copying and pasting, and it just becomes like this giant game of telephone. And you're like, I don't think I believe that.
That is a really good point. That's actually one of the things, big misconceptions we see is, the United Nations had their livestock's long shadow, where they came out and said, cattle's, carbon footprint is so much bigger than all of these other industries. And that study has actually been like retracted, redone. They've had to come out with new information. They've had to say we were wrong. And because what happened was for cattle, they looked at the entire life cycle analysis. So every single bit of a cow's life and how much carbon footprint went into it, versus on transportation, they actually only looked at tailpipe emissions. So not what went into, building the car, how it's going to decompose, the batteries. They didn't go into any of that. And so it obviously skewed cattle to be a lot larger of a footprint. And even though it's been retracted, it like lives on in infamy that people quote it. You see it everywhere especially on, like vegan activist sites. They're like, well, livestock's long shadow. And you're like, that's been retracted. But one headline just takes the media by storm. And then to go back and redo and take it all back, it takes us saying it 10 more times with accurate information and 4 white papers and, research and all these things. And you still can't really ever, take it back and unring that bell.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, that's actually the study Tara's talking about is actually the whole basis for cowspiracy.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's founded on. Is he references that study. I know, it's crazy. That's the study he's talking about. Like when he asked them, he's like, well, what about, it was published by Lifecycle. Like that is what he's actually talking about in the film over and over again. When he's asking questions and grilling people, that's what he's talking about. And it's like, it's been since debunked. And yeah, Cowspiracy, if you scroll all the way back on their Twitter, they put out a Twitter post that says, they retracted from the 50% down to, whatever percentage they claimed it was at that time. So they retracted it, but like Tara said, it's still out there. People still watch it. People still make graphics from it. It gets carried on.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the person like me who just doesn't have time to go and like fact check something, you're like, I don't know. I don't think this is right, but you've got all these vegans in your face telling you like, this is what it is. And a lot of people just don't have time to go out and research this stuff. So I think that's why it's important that we put out a message like this.
Yeah. And it's to no one's fault. Like you said, it's unfortunate that we live in a society where we'd have to like trust no one, right? Like double check everything for face value. But it's where we are. And yeah, it's unfortunate. And I do think that's one of the problems here that we're up against, I guess, when it comes to, the anti-meat narrative or the, anti-agriculture narrative. They get to put out a quick headline that's like, cows are killing the planet and they're done. Or like Tara said, the billboard that, shows, a hamburger with like thousands of water droplets after it. And, they get to do all of that and it's really easy. And then we have to come behind and explain in like an hour-long podcast or 4 blogs. And then still we're the ones that are like, are you sure? You're biased. We don't trust that, or double check it. And it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is the way that people are. They just assume that it's on a headline, it's on a billboard, Oprah says it, or whoever celebrity. Like, I feel like celebrities have really jumped down the plant-based agenda just in the last few years. And I don't know, what kind of blowback have you seen where all that is concerned?
Yeah, they're definitely, I feel like this entire plant-based, meat-based is like on a pendulum. And I do feel like 5 years ago, we swung really far towards plant-based. And I personally feel like we're having a little bit of a swing now in the opposite direction. Not to like throw stones at the plant-based alternative milks, but we were hearing they were better for you, they're better for the planet. And now we're coming out with all this information, studies of, what their environmental impact is, what their health, impact is. People are turning the labels around and seeing like, oh, red meat, 1 ingredient, dairy, milk, 1 ingredient, versus, lots of ingredients. And it's not that lots of ingredients are bad. I just think people are looking for those, whole products, and, animal protein delivers on that. And so I do think that maybe that's optimistic thinking, or like that I should be more doubtful, but I think we're kind of coming back around maybe to some more sound nutrition advice that's like, let's offer whole foods and just in their natural form foods. And I do really love to see that.
I also think there's been a lot of celebrities who tried that and then have now come since and said, didn't work for me. And I think that's an important part of it, is that they were, able to step forward and be honest with their communities about like, I tried this lifestyle and I was not feeling good. It did not work for me. And I think that's kind of helped push maybe the, like, let's question, how other people are living their life. And that's great for them. But does that necessarily mean I need to bring that choice into my own life?
Yeah, Absolutely. I've seen a lot of those kind of floating around lately of like, I tried to be vegan and it wasn't for me and I couldn't do it and I didn't feel well. And that was definitely my story of when I first was a yoga teacher. I thought that that's what I had to do was be vegan. And then ultimately my health became a complete mess and my body just literally wasn't getting what it needed. And yeah, the rest is history. I had to start eating animal protein, and as the years have progressed, I realized like what a health promoting food it is, you know?
Yeah. And I think as like women, especially in like reproductive
Oh
years,
gosh.
I feel like we are who is being targeted for a lot of the
Mhm.
plant-based things, and to the very detriment of our health. I mean, when you really look at the nutritional needs of what we need, every single day and throughout these years of our lives, it's just really hard. And I think one of the things that we've had, Natalie and I have seen is, you go from having the standard American diet, which we can all probably agree could use some work and is maybe not the healthiest with overly processed foods. And so you go to a vegan diet and you maybe do have kind of like some of those health benefits that you're eating, like a lot of vegetables, a lot of, whole foods, like you swing the opposite way. But then once you've depleted some of those, built up resources that you have, reserves that you have, then you go back the other way. And so it's interesting. It would, doing food studies is really hard because of how many people you have to have. But it is a shame that we don't have more like sound data, because obviously a lot of people have anecdotal evidence, and it's hard to stand on that. And so, having that data that proves, different things or shows different things about the food would be helpful, because there's just a lot of other factors that are going on of how these diets can really be a detriment to your health.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the whole thing that a lot of people talk about, that maybe you guys can both speak to a little bit, is this whole thing of like factory farming and how feedlot and this, that, and the other. And it's just, that's what we want to avoid. I only do regenerative. I want to stay away from factory farming. So maybe you can break that down just a little bit and talk about what that actually means, because I think a lot of people they throw around terminology without a basis behind it, just kind of what the media has shown them.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. So we are a large farm. We're a large dairy farm, and Natalie can share hers. They're a larger size operation as well. There is a ton of misconceptions that big is bad and like small is better, and that is just not the case. I think it's for dairy farming, it's over 95% of dairy farms are family owned and operated. It's very similar for beef. So if you came on our farm, like if you just looked at the numbers for our farm, you didn't come to our farm, we would absolutely probably be classified by activists as a factory farm. We are completely family owned, family operated. My close-up cows, my milking barn is about 150 steps from my house or so. My backyard is our close-up cows. So our cows that are about to give birth, they are called close-up cows because they are literally closer to our house so that we can keep a better eye on them as they're delivering, make sure things go well. I mean, it's just, my kids are here. Like we walk outside and we are on our farm. And I'm like, if this is a factory farm, then sign me up, because like it's our whole lives. Like it's what we do. My husband is in partnership with multiples of his brothers, his dad. So it's a multi-generational family farm that supports, a lot of families. Like it is bigger. But really the only thing that's different to me is it just supports more families within that same farm. Whereas I think that, when farms were smaller, on average, it was supporting typically like one or two families. And now our farm being bigger just supports more of us within the same operation. And so there's actually a lot of really good benefits to being bigger. From a dairy farming side of things, you have to milk your cows every single day, 365 days a year. Being bigger allows my husband to have vacation days, which is a privilege. Smaller dairy farms, I know dairy farmers that have never left their county because they have to be with their cows all the time, milking them. It allows us the opportunity we have a vet that comes on site once a week to do herd health checks. We have a nutritionist that plans all of our cows' diets. down to, talking about like getting really crazy with your macros and your micronutrients. That is the nutritionist's job for our dairy cows, is making sure to formulate a diet exactly for that cow's life, where they're at in their life and what they need. And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions about bigger farms, but we actually offer quite a bit of tours in our town, and we have Air Force Base near us. And so we get a lot of people from urban settings out to the farm, and they're just always so surprised at how much goes into it, how much, just how much more high tech it is, but at the same time, how much of a family setting it is, more than they expected. And it really just dispels a lot of those myths when you have the opportunity to actually go out and see an operational farm, ranch, dairy, whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure what people mean actually when they say factory farm. Like, I'm not sure what they're referring to. And I actually think maybe it's lots of times different things. One person saying factory farm could mean it in a different thing than the way another person is saying it. But it's very confusing to me, because when I look at what we, how we raise our cattle, we're at the beginning of the supply chain. I'm not running a feedlot. That would be when most people get upset about cattle production, but they're out at grass 2/3 of their life, if they do enter the feedlot. And so I look out at our cattle, I spend every day, outside with them. And then I see images of like plant-based, or meat, produced in the lab. And I think that's actually a factory farm. Like, that is grown in a factory. I don't understand what you're saying when you say like the beef industry is factory, or like, it just doesn't really make sense to me. I can't even grapple what they mean when they say factory farm. Just like Tara said, I mean, over 90%, I think even when it goes into farming, like, is over family owned. And so I think there is some play on words, maybe to, again, instill fear. I think that's one thing that is, a detriment to how we have shifted in society to so few producing food for so many. Obviously, there is going to be a gap. And at any time there's a gap with any industry, whatever it is, there's just room for questions and confusion. And I think people use that to their advantage to instill fear. I think some companies take advantage of it to instill marketing tactics so that you'll buy their product. I mean, I really think the gap is being used against consumers, unfortunately, because you don't know, right? Like, you're living in a larger city. Why would you know what's going on at the farm? You don't have to know. You shouldn't have to know. But I think that is being used against people now. And it's really, really unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, are there bad guys? Are there like evil farms or like bad places where you'd say, stay away from those places, or this is what they're talking about? Or is that kind of more of like a made up thing?
I feel like in any industry, there is room for improvement, or there's bad apples. Unfortunately, I feel like within our industries ourselves, we try to do a good job of not policing, I don't think that's the right word, but like keeping an eye on things. Like I said, if you were, a dairy farmer that had multiple hits against you on like antibiotics, then as a co-op, we're a part of a co-op. So it is a group of dairy farmers. We're going to say you can no longer be a part of our co-op. We had, on the beef side, we had an expert come in and talk about beef processing. Similar, if you were not doing what you were supposed to and your cattle are ending up at the processor, they're going to not let you bring your cattle anymore. And so I do think we try to have our own balances in place within the industry to make our system better. I mean, we want customers to have trust in their food system, trust in us. Like, that's our job, is to, give you guys a product that you want and you believe in and that you trust and know to be like healthy and nutritious. And so I feel like is it a perfect system? Is there ways we could do it better? Absolutely. But I like to think that we are working towards being better. I mean, I know, and Natalie will say the same, animal welfare has never been better than it is right now. And we are working towards even better practices. And so for us, it's a constant like improvement, just like with any job or company. I think you're working towards bettering yourself, bettering the system. And so while we could do things better or differently, I do think overall farmers and ranchers are working towards that every day.
I love that. And I guess, what is the biggest thing? We've talked about misconceptions. We've talked about the water issue, factory farming. What is the biggest message that you're trying to get out? I know you said you have a podcast. I'll make sure I link that in the show notes for everyone, and all of your social media handles, all of that. But I know, what's your biggest overarching message that you want people to hear?
Yeah. So with the podcast, we actually cover 3 trending news articles in the ag and food space. And I think our really goal there is you see a headline. We've talked about headlines already today. You see a headline and you think there's got to be more to this story. Over on Discover Ag, we try to break it down, bring differing viewpoints, really research topics. Like you said, it's hard to go out there and research everything you see about farming. And so that's what we try to do on Discover Ag, is even take topics, a little outside of our wheelhouse. We'll bring in experts that we've talked about here too, and be able to show you, kind of like uncover, agriculture. And so that you can discover ag. That really is what we are hoping, is that people can see their food system and agriculture in a new way, in a way like unfiltered through media, unfiltered through celebrities. It is just a farmer and rancher talking about, what's going on in the food space.
Do you have anything to add to that at all?
No, I mean, we're 2, millennial girls. I don't know if people, if you put the video out on YouTube or anything, but if you're just listening to the podcast space, we're young, we're in our 30s. And so we bring, I think, a really unique perspective too. I think there's a stereotype that, farmers and ranchers are old men in coveralls, and Tara and I obviously breaking that stereotype. And I think we'd like to have fun with it too, because I think it's important to remind people that like ag is cool. There's a lot of innovative things happening in the ag and food space too, that I think just doesn't get out there to consumers. It's like we attend these conferences and I think, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Why can't more people know about this? And so I think that's another thing we're trying to bring, is like we try and make it as informative, but also equally entertaining and fun. And just remind people that like, we're here to make ag, make it cool again.
Very cool. And where can people find you if they want to listen to your podcast? Or I know you both have social media handles. I was actually following both of you, and you had email. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Follow both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
you can find me on my personal channel is Tara Vander Dussen. So just my name everywhere, my name. And then for Discover Ag, you can find us at DiscoverAg_ on Instagram, Twitter, kind of all those places. We hang out the most on Instagram, I feel like, both personally and as the podcast. And then you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, obviously, Discover Ag Podcast. And then Natalie.
Yeah, my personal channel is my name as well. It's Natalie Kovarik. So if you're interested on what, ranchers in Nebraska do, I bring you guys along every day. So come hang out.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I have all that linked in the show notes. But this has been really wonderful. And I'm excited to share this with my audience. Hopefully break apart some of these myths that people are worried about, maybe the wrong things, and then provide this awesome resource of your podcast and social media. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, the links for today's guests are in the show notes, so make sure you head down there to follow them, check out more of their work. And the 2 sponsors of today's episode are also down in the show notes. Viva Rays, my code there is Yogi for those circadian glasses and upgraded formulas. Code Yogi12 or Yogi if you've used that one before, for those minerals and protecting the mineral balance in your body. Thank you again for listening to the show. If you did enjoy it, please share it with a friend, family member, especially if they need a different point of view when it comes to agriculture, farming, if they want a different way of looking at things firsthand from the source. And if you do enjoy the show, make sure you head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave us up to a 5-star review to continue to get the word out to more and more people. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you again very soon.